16. Jacqueline Heirs. While working in a routine patrol in Little Silver, Sergeant Andrew Smith pulled a woman who was driving a Nissan over after she was seen swerving erratically. The driver, 40-year-old Jacqueline Heirs, allegedly showed some possible signs of intoxication, forcing Smith to perform a field sobriety test on her. He asked Heirs if she could recite the alphabet without actually singing it, but she was unable to complete the simple exercise well enough to prove that she wasn't drunk. Heirs blamed her poor driving that night on her emotions, claiming that she'd recently gone through an extremely messy breakup. To give her some credit, she did confess that she'd been drinking, and that she had her last drink about an hour before jumping behind the wheel. But Smith suspected that Heirs wasn't being completely truthful about how much alcohol she had consumed and how recently it was. During the conversation, another officer arrived at the scene to assist with the situation. Heirs underwent a few more sobriety tests and continued to perform poorly on all of them. She was then arrested for driving under the influence and was taken to the police station, where she allegedly refused to consent to a breathalyzer test to determine what her blood alcohol content was. The police were able to call a friend of Jacqueline's to pick her up from the station. When the friend got there, she suddenly burst into tears and told him that the cops had pulled her over with homelessness. She continued crying while explaining that she didn't want to call her parents. She also described herself as a good girl, and she mentioned repeatedly that her cousin was even a police officer. Heirs was clearly having a terrible night, but luckily for her, she was released and told that she'd most likely just end up paying a small fine, which is certainly much better than going to jail. 15. Carlos Luna Garza. In November 2023, a teenager named Carlos Luna Garza was accused of robbing a Pizza Hut delivery driver in El Paso, Texas. He made law enforcement's job a lot easier by posting pictures of the victim and the stolen food to his social media page, which took all the guesswork out of identifying him as the primary suspect. According to court documents, the driver left the Pizza Hut to deliver a $50 food and drink order to an apartment building nearby. After arriving at the address, he was approached by a young man in a ski mask, who ordered the driver to hand over all of the food and his phone. The suspect threatened to shoot the driver if he failed to do what he said, so he did his best to stay calm and follow orders before speeding away from the scene. A few days later, after identifying Luna Garza as the suspect thanks to his posts online, police officers connected a stolen car to the same address. They paid a visit to the teen's property, where several people quickly got out of the stolen vehicle after seeing law enforcement and fled on foot. The cops managed to catch Luna Garza, who was charged with robbery and evading arrest. 14. Bakery worker turns the tables. In August 2023, a female employee was working at a bakery in the Mexican port city of Campos when a thief stomped into the building and announced his intentions to rob the place. He lifted up his shirt to prove that he was armed while barreling toward the cash register. But instead of reacting with fear, the woman miraculously stayed perfectly calm as the suspect ordered her to hand over all the money from inside the till. In surveillance footage of the incident, the thief was heard saying that he didn't care if he was being recorded. He grew increasingly frustrated as he searched for the woman's cell phone and couldn't find it, providing her with a chance to slip out of the bakery quietly. Before the suspect could follow suit, the woman slammed the security gate down over the door and locked it, trapping him inside. The situation went from terrifying to laughable as the man begged the worker to let him out of the store, yelling, "Juanita, help me, help me!" Of course, the employee refused after just being threatened with a gun, and the suspect was seen pacing frantically as he tried to find a way out of his predicament. He ended up using a fire extinguisher to smash his way through a window, but he was immediately met by police officers, who promptly took him into custody. 13. Patrick Florence. When cops discover drugs hidden in a suspect's privates, it makes it pretty difficult for the detained individual to play dumb and deny ownership of the contraband. A 34-year-old Florida man named Patrick Florence made a last-ditch effort to avoid getting arrested in December 2021, when he claimed that some small baggies of cocaine and methamphetamine that were found wrapped around his private parts didn't belong to him. The awkward incident started during a 4 a.m. traffic stop in Clearwater. Officers then arrested the driver, 27-year-old Darius Owens, on suspicion of driving under the influence and marijuana possession. Florence was riding as a passenger at the time, but that did not exempt him from being searched by law enforcement, especially after the cops saw a handgun lying under his seat. As a repeat offender with dozens of past felony convictions, Florence is not allowed to own or possess a gun or ammunition. He denied that the gun was his, but was still taken into custody on a pair of felony weapons charges. During a more thorough search, police found the cleverly hidden coke and meth, which Florence allegedly denied being the owner of. He failed to identify who the substances supposedly belonged to and was booked on additional drug-related charges. Most recently, Florence was placed on misdemeanor probation for a domestic violence conviction. His supervision was suspended in early 2024 after he was taken into custody for yet another offense. 12. Dariel Hutton. During a criminal investigation that took place in Largo, Florida back in October 2018, a police officer asked 52-year-old Dariel Hutton if they could search her purse while looking for the keys to her boyfriend's pickup truck. According to an arrest report, Hutton insisted on rummaging through the purse herself while the cop simply stood by and watched. He noticed what looked like a crack pipe with some residue on it sitting inside the bag, but was unable to confiscate it before Hutton grabbed it and removed it herself. The officer later noted that he grabbed Hutton's wrists in order to handcuff her, at which point the suspect popped the crack pipe into her mouth. She allegedly refused the cops' orders to spit the pipe out and started chewing on it in a poor attempt to destroy evidence. Hutton was accused of making a big swallow before the officer finally got her to open her mouth. The crack pipe was gone, and the inside of Hutton's mouth was severely cut up from chewing on broken glass. It's probably safe to assume that she was given medical attention before being booked into custody on a felony charge of tampering with evidence. She was also charged with felony narcotics possession for having methadone without a legal prescription, as well as one misdemeanor count of resisting arrest. According to the Smoking Gun, Hutton already had a lengthy rap sheet consisting of several drug-related convictions at the time of her arrest. Records show that she had previously served a 15-month state prison sentence for cocaine-related charges stemming from some arrests that happened throughout 2009. A simple Google search of Hutton's name reveals numerous articles about her past arrests. In 2006, she was accused of stealing her way into jail by way of a 5-hour crime spree, which started when she asked a man who was selling his car if she could take it out on the town for a test drive. According to police, she pretended to get the key stuck in the ignition. While the owner went into his house to grab a pair of pliers, Hutton allegedly sped off in the vehicle, driving through people's front yards at high speeds before actually getting on the road. The stolen car was later spotted outside a store where Hutton was accused of stealing perfume, hairspray, CDs, DVDs, and clothing. Authorities claimed that she planned to use the vehicle as a getaway car, but was caught shoplifting. So instead, she was held inside the store's security office. While the guard was away, she managed to pry open the door and left the scene on foot. According to law enforcement, Hutton ran to a nearby Pizza Hut parking lot, where she stole one of the delivery driver's Volkswagen Beetles. She didn't get very far this time before she crashed into another car. Hutton tried running again, but deputies managed to apprehend her before she could cause any more trouble. 5 years prior, in 2001, Hutton was accused of leaving her sick child in a neighbor's care and failing to come back to pick the kid up. She has managed to avoid making any more headlines since her arrest back in 2018, which hopefully means that she's now on the straight and narrow and is living a better life. 11. Dennis Anderson. You can get a DWI for being drunk on a horse, scooter, or even a bicycle. And it's smart to assume that if a car has wheels and a motor, you can get arrested for driving it while drunk almost anywhere in the US. A 62-year-old Minnesota man named Dennis Anderson learned this lesson the hard way in 2008, when he was accused of driving his motorized lazy boy chair into a parked car. According to the Proctor Police Department, Anderson registered a blood alcohol content of 0.29. That's more than 3 times the legal limit in his state. And while it's almost laughable to think about the amount of damage a lounge chair can do with a measly 8-horsepower lawnmower engine running it, law enforcement took the incident seriously. While police were clearly not amused by the incident, they were at least kind enough to entertain the public with images of the customized vehicle, which was decked out with a stereo, headlights, and even a built-in cup holder. It was also equipped with a steering wheel, but had no seatbelt, and was adorned with the National Hot Rod Association logo, as well as a "Hell yeah, it's fast" bumper sticker. Sadly for Anderson, the rolling lazy boy was taken away not long after his arrest, and auctioned off along with property that had been seized from other defendants. Anderson pleaded guilty to the DWI charge and was sentenced to serve 2 years of probation in lieu of a 180-day suspended jail sentence. He was also ordered to pay a $2,000 fine, showing that Minnesota knows not to mess around when it comes to drunk driving. 10. Cordell Coleman. Typically, when a person is released from jail, they stay on their best behavior for at least a few days, even when they're a repeat offender. After all, being locked up isn't exactly a fun time, and most people will make somewhat of an effort to avoid going back, especially when the memory is still fresh in their heads. But 33-year-old Cordell Coleman from Little Rock, Arkansas, lacked enough self-control to stop himself from reoffending just moments after he walked out of the Pulaski County Jail back in April 2021. According to law enforcement, he'd just gotten out of the facility shortly before 3 o'clock in the morning after being held for public intoxication, when he spotted a police SUV with the keys still in the ignition. Apparently unable to resist the immense temptation to do something that would soon land him back behind bars, Coleman got behind the wheel of the 2018 Ford Explorer and drove off. The SUV's absence was discovered when the cop who was supposed to be driving it left the jail after booking a suspect into custody. Police were quick to identify the suspected culprit, whose little joyride was caught on surveillance footage. The patrol vehicle was soon spotted at an apartment complex about 10 miles from the jail. After he had just been released back into the free world, Coleman turned around and headed straight back to county lockup, where he was booked on suspicion of felony theft. In a dashcam video that was taken during the drive back to jail, a cop was heard asking Coleman about his reckless decision-making, but it was impossible to tell what he was saying in his mumbled responses. State records show that he's not currently in custody, which hopefully means that he's squared away his charges and has avoided any more trouble with the law. 9. Katrina Morgan. While it's a crime in most places to purposefully dial 911 for a non-emergency, police don't always arrest people for doing it, especially if the caller seems to genuinely think that they're experiencing an emergency. This was unfortunately not the case for a 50-year-old Ohio woman named Katrina Morgan, who called 911 during a night of heavy drinking in 2020 at a friend's house in Port Clinton. According to police officers, Morgan told the dispatcher that her private area was on fire and that she needed to make sure the fire department's hose was working properly. It's probably safe to assume that Katrina and her friend thought she was just being funny and saw her actions as relatively harmless, especially since her friend was heard squealing with laughter in the background of the call. The dispatcher didn't seem to understand what Katrina was saying at first, so they asked her to repeat herself. She did, and the dispatcher responded by asking for the address of the home, at which point Katrina immediately hung up the phone. The phone call lasted for only 34 seconds, but law enforcement was in no mood for Katrina's drunken stupidity. They tracked her down at her friend's house, where she allegedly resisted arrest until an officer threatened to use his taser on her. Katrina begrudgingly became cooperative at that point, but was in a clearly agitated state. She was initially charged with several misdemeanors and one felony count of disrupting public service. But she denied to take a plea deal and admitted to disorderly conduct. The judge ordered Katrina to behave for a year in order to avoid a 10-day jail sentence, and fined her $100 for her disrespectful use of the 911 system. 8. Michael Boatman. Any police officer knows that it's never a good sign when someone is seen fully naked in public, especially during the early morning hours. So, in 2021, the cops were probably fully prepared for a weird story when they saw a man strolling along a Spartanburg, South Carolina street in the nude at 1:00 a.m. Later identified as 41-year-old Michael Boatman, the individual in question had a clear plastic bag partially covering his privates and was smoking a blunt when approached by a deputy. When questioned about his strange circumstances, Boatman allegedly said he was just doing a walk of shame after his wife caught him cheating on her. He said the same thing to another deputy, this time peppering his explanation with a couple biblical references to Adam and Eve, and saying that he was willing to go to jail for what he'd done. When the cops asked Boatman about the blunt he was holding, he reportedly admitted it was marijuana and threw it onto the ground. According to a police report, he also confessed to using meth prior to his encounter with law enforcement. Boatman was accused of trying to leave the scene on foot while the deputies ran a background check on him. But he didn't get very far before they tackled him to the ground. He allegedly continued to resist arrest while being taken into custody, prompting one of the deputies to use a pain compliance technique to get him under control. At that point, Boatman stopped resisting and was apprehended without any further incidents. He was booked into the Spartanburg County Detention Center for indecent exposure, disorderly conduct, marijuana possession, and resisting police. But it was still probably better than being in the doghouse for cheating on his wife. 7. Daniel Coleman. Sometimes when people get drunk, they tend to treat their immediate surroundings as a bathroom, even when that's not even remotely the room they're actually in. 46-year-old Daniel Coleman proved to be one of these individuals in November 2016, when he allegedly went into a 7-Eleven in Treasure Island, Florida, and relieved himself inside the walk-in cooler. According to police officers, Coleman at least attempted to find a bathroom after walking into the convenience store at about 7:00 p.m. When he failed to locate the facilities, he simply opened a door with an "Employees Only" sign on the outside and proceeded into the cooler, where an employee caught him peeing on several cases of beer. The worker immediately confronted Coleman and told him to stop, but by then it was already too late. He was already going, and he finished what he came to do before turning around, leaving the store, and driving off in his car. Even though he was clearly in no condition to be operating a motor vehicle, Coleman was accused of soiling 6 30-packs of Busch Light, costing the store almost $100 in losses. The employees who witnessed the incident firsthand called the police, who tracked Coleman down a half hour later and pulled him over. He allegedly performed poorly on field sobriety tests and was arrested on suspicion of drunk driving, along with charges of criminal mischief and burglary for the mess he made in 7-Eleven. 6. Ronaldo Leonard. If you're planning on stealing a car, it's probably a good idea to steal one that's not easily recognizable, not, say, an ambulance. In early 2021, 36-year-old Ronaldo Leonard of Houston, Texas, apparently didn't think much about this when he allegedly got behind the wheel of an ambulance at a fire station and sped away. He also wasn't thinking when he drove the stolen car to a Jack-in-the-Box drive-thru with the emergency lights flashing and ordered food like it was any other normal day. The good news is that law enforcement recovered the $150,000 ambulance quickly and in an undamaged state. But the situation ended badly for Leonard, who was arrested and booked into the Harris County Jail for felony theft. Things got worse for him when the prosecutor asked the judge to look at his extensive rap sheet, which consisted of prior convictions for robbery, cocaine and PCP possession, and tampering with evidence. Records show that Leonard was convicted of the theft charge, as well as a single count of aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, stemming from an incident that took place in 2022. He's currently serving a 6-year prison sentence, but could be released on parole as early as November 2024. Hopefully this time, he'll be smart enough to avoid doing something that will land him back in the slammer. 5. Michael Campbell. It only takes one glance at 48-year-old Michael Campbell of Greene County, Missouri, to understand why the repeat offender has been labeled one of the world's scariest perps. His demonic facial tattoos are nothing short of terrifying, and just based on looks alone, he's not the type of guy most people would want to meet face-to-face on the street, even in broad daylight with plenty of witnesses there. An examination of Campbell's rap sheet gives you even more reasons to fear him. He's been convicted of some seriously violent crimes in multiple states, including multiple assaults and attempted assaults against women dating all the way back to the late 1990s. In October 2021, he was accused of trying to assault a woman while her boyfriend slept right beside her. Speaking with the police after the incident, the woman described her attacker as an unknown white male with face tattoos. A witness also provided a similar description, which made it pretty easy for police to identify Campbell as their primary suspect, considering his unique appearance. His willingness to commit such brazen crimes only proves that he's just as dumb as he is scary, especially since it's hard to hide from the cops when you're the only guy in town with a satanic pentagram tattoo and a cartoonish bow tie inked across your neck. Campbell allegedly left the residence on a bicycle while the victim's boyfriend chased after him. It didn't take very long for police to catch up with him, since they knew they were looking for a man covered in facial tattoos. He allegedly denied attacking the woman, but that he decided to turn her down because he had a curfew and needed to go home. The arrest came 1 year after Campbell was convicted of assault, property damage, and violating an order of protection in a different case, which he served a 6-month prison sentence for. If convicted of the assault he was accused of back in 2021, he faced a potential lifetime imprisonment. Sadly, he managed to maintain his freedom long enough to be arrested again in August 2023 for allegedly attacking his neighbors with a machete, shovel, axe, and even a pitchfork. According to witnesses, Campbell flew into an unhinged rage and assaulted multiple victims for accusing him of littering outside his home in Springfield. He was seen throwing garbage and other items from his house onto the street, prompting a nearby witness to confront him. Police were called to the scene twice before they arrested Campbell, who remains held without bond to this day at the Greene County Jail on 3 felony counts of unlawful use of a weapon, 1 felony count of armed criminal action, and misdemeanor assault and littering charges. Considering the fact that he has enough mugshots to fill up a photo album, one can only hope that this time he's given a substantial prison sentence. 4. Natalie Call. 23-year-old Natalie Call likely never expected her own kids to turn her into the police for leaving them at home by themselves. But that's exactly what happened one night in December 2018. According to law enforcement, a young child called 911 at 10 p.m. and told the dispatcher that they needed help using YouTube because their parents weren't at home. Officers went to the family's apartment in the Iowa City suburb of Coralville, where they reportedly found 3 children aged 5, 3, and 1, at home all by themselves. Call returned to the residence at some point during the police visit. She allegedly admitted to leaving the kids without adult supervision for about 40 minutes while she went to pick up her boyfriend from a neighbor's house. And she also admitted that the little ones would not have been able to properly take care of themselves in the event of an emergency. Authorities charged Call with 3 counts of child endangerment and 1 count of possession of drug paraphernalia for having a marijuana pipe in her apartment. She spent the night at the Johnson County Jail and was released the next morning with instructions to go back to court at a later date. Sadly, it wasn't Call's first run-in with the law for failing to properly care for her kids. 3 years earlier, in 2015, one of her children drank vodka and ended up in an emergency room in Kenosha, Wisconsin, where the family was living at the time. Call claimed that the kid's father poured vodka into a water bottle without telling her, and that she'd unknowingly used 2 ounces of it to mix the baby's formula. It wasn't long before the kid got sick and was rushed to the hospital, where her blood alcohol content tested at over 4 times the legal limit. Thankfully, the child was okay. Afterward, Call told local news station WISN that she was terrified about her daughter's safety and that she would likely lose custody of the little girl. The misunderstanding led to a violent fight between Call and the baby's dad, Brian Smith, who was arrested on a domestic violence charge for allegedly attacking both Call and his own sister. The women later said that Smith's behavior was completely out of character for him, but after 2 incidents over a 3-year period, it was only natural for people to find the couple's parenting skills questionable. 3. Lawrence Mitchell. In September 2018, a police officer noticed a vehicle parked at a public park in Port St. Lucie after hours. He naturally went over to see what was going on and discovered 53-year-old Lawrence Mitchell sitting in the driver's seat by himself. When asked why he was sitting there, Mitchell told the cop that he'd driven his teenage son and the boy's girlfriend to the park and was waiting in the car while the young couple went out and did their thing. Most parents would not condone this activity, let alone facilitate it, so it's only natural that the officer asked for clarity about what exactly Mitchell thought the teenagers were doing. He was probably surprised when Mitchell replied, "So they can do what kids do." By that point, it was clear that Mitchell knew the teens had met up to engage in some hanky-panky, and that he strangely seemed totally okay with it. Still baffled by what he was hearing, the patrolman asked for even more clarity. Mitchell allegedly said that he knew the kids were probably fooling around with each other, adding that at least they weren't stealing and, in his own words, they could be out there doing worse. According to a police report, he also confessed that he didn't know his son's girlfriend and that he did not get permission from her parents for her to leave the house when he picked the underage girl up. Mitchell failed to see the problematic nature of his thinking, so the cops hung around until the teens emerged from a nearby soccer field. When asked what they were doing there, Mitchell's son was even more blunt than his father. And when law enforcement asked him if his dad knew what he and his girlfriend had been doing, the young man allegedly just laughed. Police also questioned the girl, who reportedly admitted that she'd been intimate with her boyfriend during their time in the soccer field. When an officer asked the girlfriend if her boyfriend's father knew why he'd driven the couple to the park, she replied, "Well, I mean, he drove us out here, but I don't know." Needless to say, Mitchell's parenting decisions didn't sit well with the police. He was charged with contributing to the delinquency of a minor and released on $750 bail with instructions to return to court at a later date. While the outcome of Mitchell Sr.'s case is currently unclear, records show that a 20-year-old man from Port St. Lucie named Lawrence Mitchell Jr. is serving a 5-year felony probation sentence for theft-related convictions from 2022. According to several news reports, he and 3 other suspects stole 19 French bulldogs that were worth an estimated $100,000 from a local residence. Mitchell was also accused of stealing an elderly woman's purse. making his teenage tryst in the park seem a lot more trivial compared to his current legal situation. 2. A hyperinflated heist. Pretty much anyone would agree that having $20 quadrillion sounds like a dream come true. But that's only the case if the currency is actually valuable, which one thief may have failed to realize when they stole 20 quadrillion Zimbabwean dollars from a Bedford, Pennsylvania home at the start of 2024. It sounds like too much money for one person to carry by themselves, but the money consisted of 20 bills in denominations of $100 trillion each. Issued during a period of extreme hyperinflation during the 2008 global recession, the Zimbabwean notes are basically worthless beyond their value as a niche collector's item. During that same period, the country's government issued banknotes in denominations of both 1 and 10 trillion. The money was considered so worthless that many shopkeepers refused to take it and instead required customers to pay with foreign cash. In a rare move that typically only happens during periods of severe economic strife, the company's top officials started allowing civilians to conduct business using almost any foreign currency. Even the South African rand, which is worth about 5 cents to the US dollar, was preferred over Zimbabwean money. Today, these unused bills are nothing more than a coin collector's oddity, which sell for about $10 US apiece. They weren't worth nearly as much as the necklaces, rings, engagement rings, silver dollars, and $30 in loose change that the thief also made off with. The jewelry alone was valued at well over $2,600 and most likely had sentimental value to its owners. But the perpetrator unfortunately still remains at large. And now for number 1. But if you want to hear more bizarre and crazy stories, stay tuned after the video for some more content. 1. Mark Hiles. Any seasoned criminal knows that in most US states, it's considered a lesser crime to share drugs for free than it is to actually sell them. That's probably why 56-year-old Mark Hiles from Altoona, Pennsylvania, told police officers that he was giving away meth to the numerous people who were seen picking it up at a storage unit several blocks from his home back in 2020. Investigators paid a visit to the unit where they discovered Hiles and his accomplice, 25-year-old Tyler Bartley. Nobody just hangs out inside a storage unit for fun, and this unit looked as though it was being lived in. Bartley allegedly confessed that he worked as a middleman that arranged drug sales between Hiles and customers, who would stop by the storage unit and pay for the goods. He also reportedly admitted that law enforcement could expect to find large amounts of drugs when they looked through the unit. While searching Hiles, officers found 3 glass pipes holding what looked to be drug residue, along with baggies filled with meth, bath salts, and marijuana. Unlike Bartley, though, Hiles was unwilling to admit that he was selling the drugs. During questioning, he claimed that the storage unit got a lot of visitors because people knew he had meth and wanted him to share it. It's not uncommon for users to try getting drugs on someone else's dime, but the police had a hard time believing that Hiles simply shared his product free of charge. The fact that Hiles had 22 past convictions under his belt, along with several state prison sentences for drug-related crimes, only added to law enforcement's suspicions that he was more of a businessman than a sympathetic benefactor to his addicted friends. By the time Hiles was officially sentenced in early 2023, he'd been sober for almost 3 years since his arrest. His defense attorney hoped to avoid prison by asking the judge to sentence him to drug court. The prosecutor, on the other hand, pushed for a 5 to 10-year prison sentence. The judge compromised by sending Hiles to state prison for 2 to 4 years, followed by 6 years of probation. During his time behind bars, he'll be considered for placement in a drug treatment program so that he can hopefully get the help he needs to avoid future run-ins with the law.
8. Emmy Ross. As you likely already know, many people are willing to go to crazy lengths to get the perfect social media photo. Instagram influencer Emmy Ross is apparently no exception, as she proved in 2020 when she fell under police scrutiny for allegedly denting a squad car during a sultry photo shoot. The 21-year-old German celebrity Big Brother alum, who had 160,000 followers at the time, posed for the seductive shot on the hood of a patrol vehicle in the city of Hamburg. Emmy posted the photo on her Instagram along with a caption claiming that she'd been arrested after taking the snapshot. Around the same time, the Hamburg police announced the arrest of a woman they'd caught posing for pictures on top of a squad car. They accused the suspect of denting the hood and said that an investigation was underway. The agency also said that it planned to bill the perpetrator for the damages. 7. Carly Russell. In a strange situation that's only gotten more bizarre as the details come to light, a 25-year-old nursing student from Hoover, Alabama, is being accused of staging a kidnapping hoax. It all began in mid-July of 2023 when Carly Russell dialed 911 and claimed that she found a toddler stranded on the side of an interstate. She then called a family member and vanished into thin air for the next 2 days. 49 hours after the ordeal began, Russell reappeared at her parents' door at 10:45 p.m. She allegedly told investigators that a mystery man had picked her up and forced her into a vehicle. Russell claimed that she was kept in the trailer of a truck with a man and a woman, and that her abductor fed her cheese crackers and took photos of her. Her story began to fall apart though, when detectives failed to find any evidence of a toddler going missing along the highway, despite numerous cars passing through the area at the time Russell's initial 911 call was placed. Furthermore, a search of the young woman's device turned up Google searches from before the alleged kidnapping for terms like Amber Alerts and how to take money from a register without getting caught. About a week after her return, Russell admitted that the kidnapping was a hoax and apologized to the community through her lawyer. She also confessed that there was no stranded toddler along the roadside. Russell faces misdemeanor charges of falsely reporting to law enforcement and falsely reporting an incident. Each charge can carry a punishment of up to a year in prison, but Russell will likely suffer more in the court of public opinion than anything else, which has been less than forgiving toward her thus far. But her reasons for committing the phony abduction remain unclear to this day, which must be extremely confusing for her family. 6. Ashton Garcia. The crime of making false 911 calls to generate a heavily armed response to an address, also known as swatting, has become increasingly popular in recent years. A 20-year-old man from Washington state named Ashton Garcia was allegedly so enthralled with the act that he placed more than 20 swatting calls throughout the United States and Canada over a 3-month period in 2022. According to federal authorities, Garcia concealed his identity by making the calls using voice-over internet technology. He's also accused of broadcasting the calls on the Discord platform as a form of entertainment for his followers. But swatting isn't so funny when the dangers of it are taken into consideration. As U.S. Attorney Nick Brown pointed out in a statement announcing Garcia's arrest, sending heavily armed police into a home where they believe they're going to encounter a dangerous person unavoidably puts people's safety at risk by creating an unpredictable and terrifying dynamic. Not to mention, the phony calls came at a time when civilians and law enforcement throughout America were on edge due to actual shootings, which have become a seemingly constant problem in the US. Prosecutors claim that Garcia collected personal information about his victims and threatened to swat them unless they gave up money, credit card information, or explicit photos. And in some cases, armed officers stormed into people's homes with guns drawn and detained the terrified families inside. He's allegedly targeted victims in Alberta, Canada, California, Georgia, Illinois, Kentucky, Michigan, and 6 other US states. Garcia is also accused of calling fake bomb threats into the Fox News station in Cleveland, Ohio, and he also called in threats about a flight that was en route to Honolulu from Los Angeles. He faces 10 federal felony counts, including extortion, threats and hoaxes, hoaxes regarding firearms, interstate threats, and more. Some of the charges carry a sentence of up to 10 years in prison each, and it's likely safe to assume that Garcia has realized that swatting is no laughing matter. 5. Chloe Stein. 23-year-old Chloe Stein vanished during her drive home from work in May of 2023, just days before her family and friends planned to watch her graduate from Penn State University. The last person to hear from her was her boyfriend, who received a text message from the young woman stating that she'd been pulled over by police. Chloe's boyfriend tried reaching her, but it was no use. Meanwhile, her family went out looking for her and found her car abandoned along a roadside. A large-scale search ensued, with the state police ponying up tens of thousands of dollars worth of resources in their effort to find Chloe. The case took an unexpected turn when authorities received a tip from someone claiming that Chloe was alive and well at a residence in the city of Jeannette, roughly 30 miles outside Pittsburgh, and it turned out to be true. Chloe told state troopers that she had been blindfolded and abducted at gunpoint by a man posing as a cop before being dropped off in an alleyway. But her story clearly didn't add up, especially since she didn't seem distressed and never sought help from law enforcement. It was soon discovered that she hadn't been enrolled in college for quite some time, leading police to suspect that Chloe faked the kidnapping so her loved ones wouldn't turn up for her graduation ceremony, only to realize that she'd dropped out. When confronted about the inconsistencies in her story, she allegedly admitted to making the whole thing up. Chloe was then charged with 4 misdemeanors, including false alarm to a public safety agency, obstructing the administration of law, falsely reporting an offense that didn't occur, and disorderly conduct. 4. Anthony Campos Galvan. Pretty much goes without saying that you likely shouldn't try to re-enter the United States if you fled the country and are wanted for a major crime. But a 29-year-old fugitive named Anthony Campos Galvan Jr. apparently missed that page in the Crime 101 handbook after his alleged involvement in a deadly Father's Day shooting in 2023. Investigators believe that Galvan murdered 30-year-old Nestor Saldana, who was fatally shot at the pool of an apartment complex in East Houston. Gunfire broke out during a fight between Saldana and another man at around 9 p.m., according to neighbors. The suspect, who was later identified as Galvan, fled the scene before the police arrived. During his time on the run, Galvan was charged in absentia with Saldana's murder. Police advised the public to keep an eye out for the fleeing fugitive, but he made their job easy when he tried crossing into the US from Mexico in August through a point of entry in Brownsville, Texas. According to the most recent update on the case, Galvan is in custody and awaiting extradition to Houston. 3. John and Anne Darwin. British former teacher and prison officer John Darwin was reported missing in 2002 after he supposedly failed to return home from a canoeing trip in the North Sea. In reality, though, he was alive and well, but riddled by a mounting pile of debt that he and his wife Anne didn't want to face. Darwin hid out at a property owned by Anne while a massive search effort was carried out. His wrecked canoe was found, but no sign of Darwin turned up. Right off the bat, the circumstances of Darwin's disappearance seemed off. The conditions of the North Sea were calm when he went missing, calling into question how his canoe became so heavily damaged in the day or so between the time he disappeared and when it was found. Darwin was nevertheless presumed dead, and almost nobody outside his family knew any different for years. He spent the first year or so living in extreme secrecy at a small property next to his family's home, and in 2003 he moved back into the house, but apparently he hardly ever left. At one point, a neighbor recognized Darwin and asked, "Aren't you supposed to be dead?" To which he replied, "Don't tell anyone about this." Not wanting to get involved, the neighbor kept his mouth shut. By playing along with the hoax, Anne was able to escape from her husband's death and collect on his life insurance. Then, in 2004, the couple decided to move abroad. They flew to several countries to check out properties, with John using a fake passport to avoid his real identity being discovered. The couple settled in Panama, but a wrench was thrown into their plan when authorities told them that they needed to pass an extra secure background check in order to obtain visas. By then, British law enforcement had caught on to the fact that John Darwin was alive and living under an alias. Knowing that he wouldn't be able to pass the background check for his Panamanian passport, he faked amnesia and let the world find out that he wasn't dead. But it was too late. Investigators had already uncovered a plethora of evidence proving that the Darwins carried out a carefully calculated hoax. A savvy Google user had even found photos of the couple vacationing in Panama during their house hunt. Both John and Anne Darwin were convicted of fraud and sentenced to 6 years in prison. They were paroled in 2011 and eventually got divorced. John has since remarried, and Anne wrote a book claiming that she was under John's control throughout the entire scam. 2. Katie Sorensen. In recent years, a lot of mummy influencers have gone viral for sharing their harrowing accounts of alleged attempts by strangers to kidnap their children in public. The only problem is that in many of these cases, the allegations are either unproven or altogether untrue. A California-based influencer named Katie Sorensen jumped on the bandwagon in late 2020 when she accused a Latino couple of trying to snatch her kids in broad daylight at Michael's craft store in the Bay Area. In a video recorded 6 days after the alleged incident, Katie claimed that the couple commented on her children's fair complexions and followed her into the parking lot. Katie accused the pair of trying to grab her stroller, but said that they fled the scene in their vehicle thanks to a brave elderly couple who heroically intervened. Katie claimed that she made the video in an effort to warn other parents about the very real dangers of their children potentially being kidnapped and the signs she believes people should look out for if they want to protect their kids from human traffickers. The clip went viral and even landed her on the local news. The story also sent mothers all over the state into a protective panic, and understandably so. Police launched an investigation and shared footage of the alleged perpetrators that Katie had captured using her cell phone. The couple in question, Sadie and Eddie Martinez, came forward and cooperated fully with law enforcement, insisting that they had nothing to hide and had committed no crimes. Not only did investigators find no evidence of the couple committing any crimes, they had no criminal history whatsoever and were incredibly well liked in their community. Simply put, there was no reason to believe that they're trying to kidnap Katie's children. The circumstances of the situation caused many to question whether the Martinezes were falsely accused based on their race. Either way, authorities charged Katie with concocting the story and she was found guilty. And in the end, she was sentenced to 90 days in jail. 1. Missing in plain sight. In March 2015, a woman named Janie Santana reported her teenage son Rudy missing. She told police that the family's 2 dogs had returned home without Rudy after he took them for a walk. 8 years later, in 2023, news headlines reported that Rudy was found unconscious outside a church. The 25-year-old was then taken to a hospital, while Santana announced his miraculous return after a nearly decade-long absence. However, neighbors were quick to tell the media that they'd encountered Rudy regularly over the years. One woman even claimed that Rudy often hung out with her kids. Santana insisted that people were mistakenly thinking of her nephew, but community members were adamant that they knew Rudy specifically. Police soon discovered that they too had encountered Rudy repeatedly over the years, and that it just claimed to be someone else. Even the young man's relatives accused his mother of keeping him away from them nearly the entire time he was supposedly missing. As the pieces fell into place, rumors began to fly about Santana allegedly holding Rudy captive. Police believed that he was only missing for a day, and that his mother went out of her way to uphold the narrative that he hadn't been found. Her reasons for doing so are, however, unclear. Because Rudy was legally an adult when he went missing, investigators have refused to classify the situation as a clear-cut case of kidnapping or abuse. According to the most recent available updates, an investigation was underway to determine if any criminal action would be taken against Santana. During an interview with Fox 26, Rudy admitted that Santana never physically held him captive, but he accused his mother of brainwashing him into feeling obligated to stay hidden and do as he was told. He's reportedly moved in with a relative and has said that he wants no contact with Santana as he works to move on with his life. Since the first case broke, damning allegations against Santana have continued rising to the surface. In addition to the controversies surrounding the false missing persons case, she's allegedly taken 8 of her past husbands to court and has been accused of being a serial bigamist. As the case unfolds, the mysteries surrounding her life and circumstances only seem to deepen.
Thanks for watching today's video. It takes a major act of stupidity to come between best friends, but everyone has their limits. Has your bestie ever done something that made you feel embarrassed to be seen with them in public? And did the friendship survive? Tell us about it in the comments below.